What's up, everybody? Welcome to Undisciplined by Design. This is a show where we talk with innovation leaders from across the country about their approaches to driving innovation and creating the future. Today, we're talking with Heim and Roxy from Ibis Bicycles in Santa Cruz, California. They're pioneers in the boutique mountain biking industry, and they're going to talk with us about the importance of staying true to your creative vision instead of chasing trends. They'll also talk about taking bold but practical steps and integrating sustainability into your business practices. So let's dive in and see what's next. Well, Hans, Roxy, thanks for having us here today. This is fun. This is one of my favorite places to be whenever I'm in California. I usually try and make my way down here to get in some time on the bikes. So it's pretty exciting to be able to be here and talk to you both about how this works, to have the people who are really responsible for at least the vision and kind of where this brand and these bikes are coming from and what you're building. So looking forward to talking to you about some of that process and why Ibis is innovative. Recognizing too, though, that for our audience, a lot of them may not be familiar with Ibis. Maybe they know what a bike is, but wouldn't realize that these are bikes too. It's not like the bike that they rode when they were a kid. So let's start with talking a little bit about Ibis as a brand and a company. And I know you got a pretty rich history, so maybe we can hit the highlights. And how would you describe it to somebody who's not familiar with the Ibis brand?
Might let Hans take that.
All right. Ibis started in 1981 and was founded by Scott Nickel. And he was in there with the first round of mountain bikers who had kind of invented the bike for this off-road riding, which didn't really exist commercially before that. There were people who had messed around and put fat tires on cruiser bikes and ridden them off-road, but they started putting gears and better brakes and stuff that was strong enough to handle off-road riding. And this was like the late 70s, early 80s. And he was a youngster and learned how to make bikes from one of the guys who's considered one of the founders of the sport, Joe Breeze. And so there's one of the bikes that's here is the 13th mountain bike made by Joe Breeze, and Scott got it and restored it, and it's really beautiful. And you can see how far it's come since all that time. So Ibis has its roots in the beginning of the sport, basically. Yeah. And now we have about 45 people, and we've had some bikes come out that were super well regarded, best in class. Really proud of all that, and we try to have a great reputation with everybody from the customers and our dealers all the way through to the suppliers. And at this moment in time, we've managed to do that. Super happy about that.
You mentioned kind of the origins of really being founded by people who helped create the sport of mountain biking. For people who are listening or watching this who aren't familiar with the sport so much and aren't in the weeds of it, how would you position or how would you describe Ibis's position in the market? I mean, this is a boutique brand, right? And there's a lot, like the fact that we're sitting and talking with the people who have their hands on deciding what the next bike is. It's not the same as like a large multinational operation, right? You maybe kind of, where would you say that you sit in that marketplace?
I mean, we're a pretty small company. I would say that we are one of the premium boutique brands. Maybe there's like a handful of us now left. Yeah. And we are probably the only U.S. manufacturing facility. So, I think we've kind of survived the times, but I think it's a little bit of a testament to just not scaling improperly, I think. We see the bigger companies, and we know people from the bigger companies, and we see the hiring process before it gets busy, and then the firing process when it's not. And so I think trying to just take care of your employees and your coworkers, and just feeling that type of, I wouldn't say it's like familial feeling, but it's like your community. You want to make sure that you can sustain and be sustainable. So staying small, being true to what you want to do, and putting a lot of energy into research and development is kind of key. Like, you can spend a lot of money trying to sell stuff and like market whatever, but to really put your passion into like the making of things, I think sets us apart from any company. Like, you can still be small and mass manufacture, but the fact that, you know, I think Hans wanted to try something new and outrageous and like manufacture here in the middle of a very, you know, like Cal Coastal Commission type of environment. You're like, you have to be very mindful of what you do in manufacturing and just being sustainable and responsible. That's just a hard thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I think that sets us up well. That's part of why even some of the interest in doing this show with you all was knowing that in a market that's more and more dominated by mass-produced things, where a lot of times decisions have to be made based around that or based around servicing debt to a VC or something, you all have been able to take some pretty bold moves and take some bold design moves and some bold business moves and maybe buck trends or create trends. And I know that, you know, for instance, you've won a couple of innovation awards, not just in the bike category, but innovation awards period, because of that work. And would love to hear more about it. I know, like the Oso, for instance, your e-bike won one of those awards not long ago, and I'm seeing over here, looks like have another one here with the Ripmo, is that right? So how do you go about, I mean, given that you have the ability to be so close to it and make decisions that the company and the owners of the company believe in, how do you find that balance of, do we chase a trend and do what everybody else is doing to try and stay relevant, or do we actually create the trend and take some bold moves that may or may not pay off?
Yeah, there's an actual sort of calculation I do on that, which is what's the most we can do and still survive if it doesn't work.
Okay.
Which is basically, you want to try things and you want it to be, you know, entertaining and almost theatrical or super innovative, but you can't responsibly do that if it doesn't work, it's going to take you out. Yeah. So you might look at like a fraction of what you're doing and say, okay, we're going to be pretty risky with that. And then on the other stuff, you just have to make sure you're still paying the bills and everything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's take the Oso, for example. E-bikes were getting pretty popular, and they all, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but they all had somewhat similar looks and kind of a similar idea to them. And the Oso came out and was pretty different than that, right? And some people were scared by that, but it turned out to pay off. So what was that process like, especially for you as a designer, thinking about how far can I push this and still have it be acceptable, I guess?
But, well, you almost said it.
Yeah, it's most acceptable.
Yeah, the Maya principle.
Okay.
Most advanced, yet acceptable.
Okay.
And
that's
so
cool.
it's a design.
Not just most acceptable. It's most advanced.
Most advanced,
Most
yet
advanced,
acceptable.
Yet acceptable. Okay.
Yeah, and we perhaps went a little too far on that. And so that's been a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And the public has sort of gotten used to it. And now, right about now, it's kind of about right. But when it first came out, people were like, it's kind of like the Cybertruck or something. People were just like, what is that? It's, you know, they're just mad. Like, that's not a bicycle, you know. But the impetus for it was that it was very honest. All the other e-bikes up to that point, in my opinion, were really trying to downplay their e-bike-ness. They were trying to look like, as much as they could, they were trying to look like a bicycle. But they weren't. They had a huge down tube because they have to put a battery in there and all that stuff. So it was, we were like, well, if it has to have this big section for the battery, well, let's make the swing arm kind of have equal weight, you know, to it. So the bike looked appropriate. It didn't look like a bunch of skinny tubes with this big guppy belly, you know. And so we're like, it ended up looking a bit like a Moto, you know, like a motorcycle, but it was an e-bike. But it has a nice balance to it, and it definitely, as a design, I've actually had people call me when they see one and say, that's the most beautiful object I've ever seen. And I'm just like, we love that, you know. But we also know that the public, a lot of the cyclists were like, get that out of my sight. I don't like it, you know. Okay. And so it was, in that particular case, I think it sounds arrogant almost, but we were a little early or a little bit outside the MEA principle.
Yeah.
And but that principle is really useful.
Yeah. That's something I think people can latch onto. That's because it existed for you all and helped you make a decision about a boutique bike, right?
Yeah.
But that you could layer that onto any product or even an experience. What's so minimum,
most
advanced yet
acceptable.
I'm going to lock into that. I'm sure other people want to too.
Yeah, it's a really key, kind of rule of thumb that if you just remember it and apply it to everything you're doing, it's about entertaining your public, your customers, and drawing them forward with something that captures their imagination. But if you go too far, they get repelled by it. So you need to find that balance point and be right there, because the further you are without going too far, the longer your product will be relevant in the market.
Oh, that's a good call.
Because everybody else is going to be adapting as well.
And they're chasing you.
And that's the goal, is to be right on the front and in the area where the buzz is, the excitement. Yeah. But not where you look like you're a fool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's when we first started the brand again, Ibis 2.0 with the Mojo. And I remember Hans telling me, like, it can't look like a concept bike. There's a lot of concept vehicles and concept this, and when you look at something like that, you're like, okay, this is kind of still blue sky. It's like reality, but is it really? And so there's this archetype in your head of things, and a bicycle is probably the most ingrained object in your brain. You can close your eyes and you can almost see a bicycle. You don't even have to think about it. So I think when you play around with that archetype too much, it can kind of disturb people. Or, and I think too, because of, our main audience is North America, a lot of people have a hard time with trail access. So you don't want to be seen on a kind of more aggressive looking bicycle, because you're like, oh, that might mean it's a motorcycle, and trail access is already kind of tenuous in a lot of places. So I think with your confidence level and your aesthetic, all those things come into play, because the bicycle is kind of your stamp on how you want to be seen, and it's your connection to the terrain and your involvement in the sport. So I think for a lot of people, this is like an extension of them, and so you really have to kind of own it, and there's a lot you have to own when you purchase a bicycle.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned a little bit about the process of you've got feedback from people calling you after the fact. I love this thing, or what is this thing, right? But what about leading up to it? How do you get that feedback from potential customers on where the line might be of what would be the maximum acceptable?
That's a very good question. It's, in a lot of ways, it's not really possible, because anything that's actually new, they don't have the tools to think about it yet. They're not used to it. It could be weird enough for them where, do you know about negative bias?
Tell us, please.
The typical reaction for most people is just to say no. And hey, anytime there's a change, and it's something like 90% of people will just defer towards staying where they're at, and just say, oh, no thanks.
Okay.
And it's automatic, and it's just something that the way our brains are wired.
Yeah.
And so if you take something new that's maybe in this most advanced area that we're talking about, and you show it to people, sometimes you can't really count on the responses to reflect its marketability, because it might take a month or two for people to, or even a year, for people to kind of go, you know what, I like it. But initially, anything new, pretty good chance there's going to be people who just kind of hold back. And so when I was showing the Mojo around, our first bike was made out of carbon fiber. It was very dramatically different looking than most of the bikes out there. almost like starting a new category. I was showing it to the model to hardcore mountain bike friends of mine, and I got a few, oh, that's interesting, kind of where you know they don't really want to hurt your feelings, but they don't know.
Interesting, air quotes, right? Oh,
yeah,
that's interesting.
Trying to be nice, but they don't even know what they are thinking of it yet.
Okay.
And it was actually like, it's kind of a sport that everything looks tough and masculine typically. And this frame had a lot of curves and rounded edges and really a lot of interesting design. And so people didn't, and everything before that was straight lines pretty much. So people didn't know what to think initially, some of them, and they were also like, kind of worried about their masculinity if they associate with it. But what they didn't realize is that there would be shocks on there and knobby tires and suspension and all this stuff, and that eventually that would end up looking like a confident, off-road machine, and that would evolve to be how like all the bikes were. So they're just not there yet. And so it feels like it's a huge risk, and I was kind of holding my breath when we launched. And so we went to the trade show, and we had the bikes there, and people were showing up, and we're just watching their reactions.
Okay.
And there was a fraction of the people who were repelled, probably like 20%, and 80% were like just jaw-dropping, like, wow, and they'd go get their friends and show them. And some of the big important companies in the business started dropping by and then coming by with more and more of their staff and just, analyzing what we had done.
Here,
So within 2 hours of when we showed it to the public, we knew we had something. And that it ended up on the cover of every magazine. It ended up winning Bike of the Year, astonishingly, 3 years in a row with the same bike, which just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So it was huge, and it was, for us, it's a little company trying to get restarted, but we did kind of a cannonball into the pool, and everybody knew Ibis was back and that we had this new bike, and those bikes are still in service. They're out there and people are riding them, and we still have like replacement parts for them if people need them and stuff like that.
I mean, that actually kind of harkens back to something you said earlier that I think is so important, and I've heard the two of you talk about a little bit outside of this conversation, is that commitment to these bikes being sustainable and not in like a greenwashed way of saying like, oh yeah, we have some carbon offsets, but there's some legitimate care and thought put into how do we make sure that there's longevity in these bikes. And I know that's also made its way into even some of your kind of, again, you're pushing the limits on manufacturing and doing carbon manufacturing here in the U.S., not far from here. And I know there's a lot of interesting things that went into that. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about both the commitment that you have to that and why that's important, and then also the nuts and bolts of what you all are doing in that space.
One of the most basic things that everyone can understand is if you make a really high quality part or product and you make it maintainable, it actually ends up being an extremely sustainable approach, no matter what it is. If it lasts forever, basically, then that's good, right? Yeah. And if there are some wear parts and you keep making it so you can repair it and keep it going, that's fantastic. And so we've always been like that. And the thing that's neat about carbon fiber is that it doesn't fatigue fail. So let's just say you ride your bike 2 hours a day, every day. It's never going to crack from you wearing it out, where the metal bikes will eventually, like 6 or 8 or 10 years, it's going to crack somewhere, you know. Carbon fiber doesn't do that. And so the places where you would see a failure is if you crash it or it's on your roof rack and you drive into your garage or something like that.
Yeah, can't really plan for that.
You can't really solve for that. If there's metal parts on the bike, sometimes those will crack and you need to be able to either repair them or replace them, keep a little stock of those. So that's like a overall principle. If you make something really well, that is fundamentally sustainable. The other thing we're doing is trying to take the energy out of the process of making carbon bikes, like reduce the carbon footprint of carbon bikes. Yeah. And we've put quite a lot into that.
Yeah.
So from maybe the facility that we work in having, fully solar powered, and we can run off our solar energy without wasting any energy, to like creating nested shapes for our carbon layups so that you're not making 600 or 400 pieces of carbon fiber and putting them together like paper mache into a mold. We're making like 125 pieces or something very specific, that will be accurately placed in the places that they need to be. So like just reducing the number of labor hours needed to put together something, that's also another way to be sustainable and succinct about making your process. Because like rethinking time savings, and that equals money, and so you're just trying to refine everything so that maybe even the choices of color or graphics is like something that you could live with for a longer time, and it's not like so trendy or so time specific that when you look at something you're like, oh, that's completely like from the mid 2000s or something like that.
Yeah, we often turn down the sugar rush approach, where something's really dramatic but it might be only hot for a season, because that's actually poor sustainability. If you think about it, like this is like buying a overcoat that you're going to have for decades, not fast fashion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's actually a good analogy. Yeah.
And then the tools themselves and the whole process we've gone through, we're kind of engineering intensive company. We've gone through all the details from tip to tail, trying to take energy consumption and reduce it on each step. And so I think at the moment, we're not only the only guys doing bikes like this in the US or North America. I think maybe in the world we might be the only carbon neutral carbon frame factory, because we're generating excess solar power, which we put back into the grid, which offsets the embedded carbon in the materials that we use. So we're sort of offsetting for the materials, and then basically one-to-one compensating through our own power production for the production process.
Yeah, it actually kind of sounds like another example of pushing things past the boundaries of what maybe everybody else was doing or thought was advanced. You found a way to be more advanced, but also acceptable, it sounds like.
This entire project is, most companies would tell you it's absurd and it's impossible, and they're pretty much right. But we did it in a way where we did it very modest in the beginning. Like 10 years ago, we just did a pilot run of one size of one of our models. That was small, so it didn't sell in huge numbers. We did it like in the back of the warehouse and did that for a while, and we're like, okay, it works, and we went to the next level and the next, and so now we have a building dedicated, and we're about to launch one of our more popular models and make all the sizes and everything here. And it'll be at a pretty decent volume. So we've approached it incrementally, and that goes in that category of taking risks that are real risks, but they won't put you out of business. And so it's I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to anyone because it is so close to the edge of not working, but it does look like it will work, and we have a path, and we're executing on it carefully.
Thinking back to that, did you, at the time, 10 years ago, was it because you had the foresight to say, hey, eventually we're going to need to be able to do this all in-house, or did you do it because you just knew that it was the right thing to do to try and be more sustainable? Did you do it because it was an exciting challenge? You want to prove that
all of those things?
Yeah. Okay.
It's fun. You got to do hard stuff.
That's exactly it. If you just do the obvious and the lower effort stuff necessarily, you're not satisfying people who like to do hard things. And the most interesting place to be is when you don't know exactly what's going to happen. Like if you already know it's going to happen, it's kind of boring, right?
Yeah.
So some fraction of what you do should probably be in that zone of, okay, if we do everything right, we think it might work.
Okay.
You know, and,
Yeah.
and you do those experiments and you try it, and it's amazing because the whole company is engaged and it's exciting.
Yeah.
Because you don't know. If you did know, then it's like, just another day.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that's really interesting because you're talking about sustainability in a way that's actually baked into a bunch of things that wouldn't necessarily be associated with sustainability, even down to this thing's fun and I want to keep it for a long time.
Yeah, we just want to get people outside and on the trails, and this is kind of like the most satisfying way to do that, you know. And it's like a form of healthcare, you know. Like you're really kind of, you know, making something that is going to be part of someone's life. And you know, we've actually had really amazing photos of people that send in their like I think marriage photos, and like they're literally holding on to their bikes and their partners, and it's like their wedding day, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is like someone's life, and you know, you're a part of
tattoos, you know, of the company logo, and you're like, okay, calm down, you know.
Like their bikes on their arm, you're like, wow, that's really awesome. So, you know, I think also, you know, we are so close to Silicon Valley, and the tech moves so fast that, you know, sometimes it makes our head spin, you know, trying to like make sure that we're, you know, in the right, you know, modes of like where the industry is going, and what, you know, motor systems people are using for e-bike batteries and motor systems. And it's just a little bit like fast, and it reminds me of like the .com era of like, blow it up, and like, you know, Silicon Valley, like let's just, you know, like, I don't know, make things and let them break. And you're like, no, that's like not our approach. Like we want to break things before you break things, you know. And that timing, I think, is so ingrained in retail, you know. And you know, like technology moves so quickly that it's like, it's so nice to be in a space where you're thinking about the people involved, and you're just bringing it back to, you know, the human nature of you and a machine. And I think it's really something that brings me immense joy, because like I just want someone to have a good time and to ride on something that they trust and that works for them and is like empowering. Like you're like, I'm on a bike and I'm going off this like cool jump or like this really cool turn, and you're making just feeling like so good about, you know, coming down the hill on two wheels. And there's no feeling like it unless you're on something bad. Like you don't have like a good feeling and you're like, this is clunky, it doesn't feel good, and it's like,
or it's terrifying.
It's terrifying. You don't feel safe. And so I think making things that people kind of rely on and are super special in that way, it just is such a fun realm to play in.
Yeah. The Silicon Valley connection is really interesting, because that's only like 25 miles from here.
Right.
And that culture there has a strong current of, they call it, you know, disruption. And it's almost become kind of an attraction of that business. Is like, it's almost this sort of macho, let's blow up this category and try this crazy stuff, pour a bunch of money into something and disrupt it. You know, I mean, Uber with taxis, for instance, would be a classic, you know. But it's something that we look at, and we try to take the best aspects of that, which is like, don't be too beholden to the history of something, and be a flexible thinker and open-minded, but also don't be irresponsible. And of course, since we're self-funded, we can't squander a bunch of money and then, oh, that didn't work, and move on to the next, you know, round of venture capital or whatever. So, yeah, we try to learn from them, but not take away the bad parts of it, which
Yeah.
I consider incredibly wasteful and like sometimes needlessly destructive, you know? So there's good and bad from the whole Silicon Valley thing. But I would say for us, we're pretty emboldened to try things. And within what seems like a safe range for us, we'll disrupt and try crazy stuff.
Yeah. That's a really good point to kind of close on, is just thinking about that proximity to Silicon Valley, which does have such a different mindset. And it does really feel like what you're describing is allowing that to be an inspiration, but not define you. And, you know, like you said, 25 miles away, but it feels like a different world. You know, hop over the mountain and we're in the forest, and the temperature's different and the pace of things is just different. And it's kind of like you've embraced that while still also accepting, like, and we can take a little bit from over here too.
Yeah. It's incredible. Like, there's so many people who live here and work over the hill, or, you know, are involved with that, where, you know, we're working on like on a yearly basis. We might invest, you know, a few $100,000 on a project or something like that. And there's people around who are like, well, we burned through 150 million and that didn't work, and we just try the next thing. And for us, it's like, it is literally a different world.
Yeah.
So the ethos of it, there's definitely stuff to be learned there, but we have to stay, you know, keep our feet on the ground and make sure that we don't ruin anything, you know, for the company. So
yeah. Awesome. This is fun. Thanks. I mean, it's exciting to hear more of the behind the scenes, and also to really appreciate the importance that you all place on being sustainable and making sure that your employees are happy and that people who ride the bikes are having fun. So I feel like everybody who watches this and listens to it is probably going to walk away with a new appreciation of that. I hope we get some new people who want to get out on two wheels as a result of that too. So
yeah. The whole thing is like sort of fundamentally based on respect. We respect everybody in the whole chain, from the customer through all the employees here, our dealers, our factories we deal with. And if you start from that, everything works really well.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for hosting us here and letting us take over your space here for a while. And I know the team's excited to go riding tomorrow. We're going to get out on the bikes for a little bit and experience it for ourselves. So thanks for that. Thanks for hosting. And thanks for the commitment that you have to customers and to making sure the planet stays strong and all of those things. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for spending your time.